Welcome to the Further Your Fitness podcast. I'm your host, Lloyd Thomas, and today I have another very special guest with me. He is the co-founder of the Renaissance Periodization. He has a PhD in sports physiology. He is the man of all things science and training. It doesn't look so convinced himself, but he is Dr. Mike Israetel. How are you, my friend?
Lloyd, thank you for having me on your podcast. It's an honor and a privilege.
Good. How are you? How are you dealing with? I think are you in Vegas now, currently? Good.
I am.
All good.
Yeah, I can do all the Vegas things. I actually opened up my own casino, which gambles in sex workers, believe it or not. Yep.
The ultimate. That's what everyone does when they go to Vegas.
That's literally the most Vegas thing you can do.
Just throwing the training and the degree, everything you've learned out the window, and it's all
nonsense.
Chips and pool parties.
Chip's take on a different meaning in Las Vegas. So yes.
I'm very happy to have you on. I think I've been following your things for a while now, and I noticed if anyone out there is kind of looking to enhance their training and want to learn a bit more, but don't want to get bored out of their brains through too much, I think you guys at RP are very good at kind of blending the two.
Well, thank you so much. We do try.
Yeah, you rarely get someone starting a fitness podcast talking about living it up in Vegas, so it's a good start.
That's right. Lying about it, actually. My life is insanely boring, so I have to compensate with lies.
It's good. It works anyway. I think to begin with, we're going to delve straight into it, but I know that possibly some of the listeners, when using some of the abbreviations we may use in this, it may go straight over their heads, basically. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to fire out some abbreviations, and you're going to do a quick little explanation of them. Sound good?
Sounds good.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so RIR.
Never heard of it. That would be a rough start to the podcast. You're like, this guy's an idiot. Reps in reserve, it's basically how many reps you think you have until you've reached failure. So if you say, well, that was about 3 RIR after you stop doing a set, the person hearing that can expect that you could have done 3 more reps with good technique, and that 4th was kind of like a 50-50 chance of making it. So when people say, RIR, they usually are trying to describe what's called a relative effort. How hard did you work compared to how hard you could have worked if you were working as hard as possible?
I suppose for a beginner, how would you gauge that if you say a couple of months into your training or less?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So for beginners, actually, this is the same answer for beginners, intermediates, and advanced. Failure, it can be defined very specifically. And in the context of what I would call proper training, you reach failure when you are unable to lift the load through a full range of motion, exhibiting good technique. So if you have to wiggle your technique to someone walks by you bench pressing and goes, is that man suffering? Is he doing his best impression of a whale that has been beached onto the sand? Or is that really a bench press? Again, if you have to go there, you've already failed. So failure is considered when you can't move the load through full range of motion with good technique. And in people that are advanced, their technique doesn't break down because they're so good at it. They've had so much practice that what ends up happening is their technique's never in question, and the actual muscles themselves can't go anymore, and that's failure. With beginners, they can keep going considerably longer than after their technique is broken down. So for them, if they are coaching themselves, or hopefully if they have a watchful eye, for them, failure is considered when their technique breaks down, just like it is for everyone else. But for them, that tends to occur when they have a lot of muscle strength and endurance left over, but they're now so tired that for folks not used to doing good technique, fatigue really reduces the ability for them to have that crisp technique. So folks that are beginners don't really need to worry about reps in reserve, but as soon as a set runs into one bad technique rep of when deep in your heart of hearts, like that was not a squat, I don't know what the hell that was. What I like to do is either as yourself coaching yourself or as your trainer, it's time to rack the bar, stop the set, regroup, rest several minutes, do another set. Or you can sometimes give yourself one more chance sort of situation. So that last rep was total shit, but then you're like, you know what? I'm not really that tired. I can get it together. You sort of re-arch your back, chest out, do another deep, super awesome squat. And then, wow, okay, I had another rep. Let's try another one. If you have 2 reps, either in a row or any time in a set in which the fatigue is degraded, then you rack it because you're getting so tired you can't do good technique anymore. So I would say that is the cutoff point for beginners. Once they get into the intermediate lands, they start to learn how to train very hard. Their technique starts to settle in. They know how to push themselves. Then you can speak to them in RIR terms. But beginners, you don't even need to mention that stuff. You just need to cut them off when their technique goes to hell, which is usually, 5 or 6 reps away from failure, truly, if they had good technique that was constant. And beginners, it doesn't matter because they grow so well from everything, they don't actually need to push themselves to the limit to get excellent results. When you're an intermediate, now your technique has to be stable enough for you to push it really hard.
Cool. Excellent. Covered that very well. MRV?
Maximum recoverable volume. It's really simple. It's the most volume you can consistently do in one period of time, for example, a week, which you can recover and come back to perform at least as much, at least as high of a level next week. So like if you do 10 sets of bench press in this week, 100 kilos for roughly 5 reps per set, can you come back next week and do 100 kilos for 5 reps per set? The answer for many people that can, that are that strong is like, yeah, whatever, 10, that's like 4 sets Monday, 3 sets Wednesday, 3 sets Friday. That's not a big deal. It's not going to destroy you. But if I say, can you do a week of 60 repetitions, 60 sets of the bench press, 60, can you recover your performance to be as strong as you usually were next week? And the answer is, God, you could be hospitalized, have rhabdo, or just your muscles will be so sore and weak that you come in next Monday, you hit 100 kilos for 2.5 reps, and then somebody drags it off you. And like, dude, what's going on? You're like, I don't know, my pecs aren't working. So everyone has, no matter what the task, everyone has an amount of that task that makes that task impossible to complete in the next segment of time. One gentleman famously, this is just to conceptually understand it better. Can you still hear me okay?
Yeah.
Super. One gentleman famously ran, he trained a long time for this, but he ran, I think 50 marathons in 50 days. So 1 marathon a day. And I mean, that's got to be one of the highest MRVs of all time, because he could run 26.2 miles and still recover to run 26.2 miles at a competitive pace again the next day. I mean, how many people have MRVs like that? Well, even most competitive marathon runners can't do that, because the day after a marathon, you're completely destroyed. So maximum recoverable volume is something we have to be aware of as athletes, as people that lift weights, because if you look at someone's program and they're like, oh, I do this much, one of the first questions you have to ask is like, can I recover from this consistently? Because if you can't consistently recover from it, your body's going to overreach. It's going to be in kind of like a fight or flight shock mode, and you're not going to grow much muscle, lose much fat, or get anything else done. It's just too much. There is such a thing as too much. And you got to be aware of that limit and not take your body there on a consistent basis.
Definitely. That you definitely class that as another intermediate to advanced thing, MRV.
You'll get to know it more as an intermediate. Folks that are beginners should know of the concept generally, but don't have to worry about their own, because they'll have such an easy time stimulating muscular growth and strength at such low volumes that they don't really have to worry about exceeding their maximum recoverable volumes. But if they're very prone to exhibit high workloads, some people are very motivated and very goal driven, and they say, I'm getting great gains from 10 sets of bench press a week. Maybe I can do 15. Maybe I can do 20. Maybe I'll get better gains from 25. And maybe they're right, but depending on what our MRV is, maybe they're wrong. So even beginners, hopefully the coach, sort of at least in their ear a little bit, should understand that these theoretical limits exist and basically how to detect them. So if you're a beginner and you've been slowly increasing your volume and seeing great gains, if you go like 2 weeks and you're just completely trashed, you feel like crap, and you're getting weaker week after week for 2 weeks, you're probably close to your maximum recovered volume. And it's time to do a deload and then get a little lower in volume and maybe start the rise all over again. So even beginners can take note of that. They don't have to very often, unless they're the kind of people that really push forward, which is totally cool.
And MEV.
Minimum effective volume. It's the least amount of volume, the least amount of work in anything that you have to do in order to get better at it. So a really easy example, not from training, It's like, if you're new to something, your minimum effective volume is often very low, almost, it's minimal effort. So like if you wanted to learn the French language, I assume you don't speak French. Forgive me if that's an incorrect assumption. But
Definitely. I did barely pass my kind of school subject.
yeah,
So
exactly.
you want to
There
throw a
you
word
go.
in there, I might
It's
catch
probably right. And your pronunciation is probably all. Where are you from, by the way, if you don't mind me
it.
asking?
Wales. So South
Oh,
Wales in
perfect.
the UK.
That's almost like France, same
Yeah.
idea.
A quick trip across the border. We'll be fine.
Just across the channel.
Yeah.
So a couple channels. So if you're learning French, for the first time, how much French do you need to be exposed to in order to increase your ability to speak French? I don't know, like a word a day. Like you could learn a word a day, and after 3 weeks, you're better at French than before. You're like, ooh, bonjour, I got that. Bonjour, I know what that means. It means thank you. But imagine someone who has been studying French for 4 years at a university, and they're like semi-fluent at this point, and let's say they go to university in Wales, they're semi-fluent. Do you think a fucking word? Sorry, can I swear on here, or do you not
Yeah.
appreciate this?
That's fine.
Okay.
Fuck it.
Yeah, it was sweet. How a fucking word a day is like an insult to that person. They're actually going to get. Can you imagine being a high-level French student wanting to become fluent, only being exposed to a word a day of French? You're not going to get better at French. You need conversational French. You need minutes, if not hours, of listening to or engaging in spoken French language in order to get better because you're already so good. So the minimum effective volume in hypertrophy of strength training is like, well, how much do you need to get better? The cool thing about beginners is they can do 1 set per week of an exercise, and for like, 4 to 6 weeks, get better just with 1 set. Their minimum effective volume is the lowest ability for us to measure, which is 1 working set. Now, is that really the case for folks at an elite level? You look at a high profile professional bodybuilder. Do you really think 1 set of squats is going to grow their legs? 1 set per week? Are you kidding me? They've been training for so long. It might take them 10 sets to see any results whatsoever. So generally speaking, over the course of a career, minimum effective volume rises, which is essentially the core reason why training has to become harder over time, or at least one of them.
Spot on. I'm wondering now whether the first question now, moving on from that, has just been covered already.
Well, that's cool.
Kind of the first topic I'd like to cover, which is kind of been brought on because if you worked in a gym or you've been in a gym environment enough, you do kind of see a tendency to people just kind of coming in, training how they feel, picking a lot of exercises, and then just kind of going off of that kind of blueprint. But what I'd like to ask you is generally, how do you progress in a hypertrophy program?
Yeah, like you can absolutely come in and train like whatever. As a beginner, that definitely works because your range of what works is so broad. Because you're so sensitive to muscle growth, it doesn't much matter what you're getting. Like, if you don't speak any French, just reading like menus at French restaurants will make you better at French. So the quality of the input doesn't matter a whole lot. As you get to be more of an intermediate, more advanced, gains don't really happen by accident anymore. And then you have to be more particular about them. And if you're a beginner and already particular, you could just get super high efficiency gains with the lowest risk possible. And the way you would progress there is you would start at some core basic exercises, and you would learn them very well from a technical perspective and always try to improve your technique. And you start with challenging loads somewhere in between the 5 to 30 rep range. You start with the minimum amount of volume required to stimulate any gain, something that gets you pumped, a little bit sore. You can recover from it within several days. Training the same muscle groups roughly 2 to 3 times a week or something like that, which for many people who train 2 or 3 times a week, that means whole body every single time. And then you, over the course of multiple weeks, try to add a little bit of weight to the bar when you can, keeping the reps the same or increasing the reps by 1 or 2 per set. And at the same time, if you start to feel like you're recovering way ahead of schedule, like you used to get sore in the chest, but you don't get sore anymore. I used to get pretty big pumps from two or three sets of chest work, but you're like, I don't know, feel more like a warm up now. Then you can add sets. So you can start at 2 or 3 sets per muscle group per session and work up to 4 to 6. And then it's heavier weight, more sets, potentially more reps, and then you get quite tired and your maximum recoverable volume sort of floats down to you and you rise up to it. And then at some point you need a deload, a little bit of a break. And then after that break, which occurs, for beginners, maybe 4 months into their training, for more advanced folks, every 4 to 8 weeks, Once you take that deload, you sort of start back at slightly lower volumes, close to minimum effective. And then you add a little bit of load, a few reps here and there, keep the training progressively more difficult, and work your way up in sets as needed. And you just repeat that cycle over and over. After multiple years, you'll be doing more sets than you're used to. You'll be doing way more weight, and you'll have much bigger muscles.
At what point do you, in your program, start to shuffle exercises around?
Yeah, there's actually one very correct answer to this. And it is, if another exercise exists which has a better stimulus to fatigue ratio for that same muscle, you should be using that exercise instead. So for example, if you start out with barbell squats, as you do them for weeks and weeks, your technique improves and potentially your mind muscle connection improves as well. So as far as for your quads, they start out being a very good exercise. After several weeks, they're a really good exercise because you've tailored the technique to yourself. And I'm sure you've noticed this in the gym as well. You start out with an exercise and it feels like really good, but a little bit awkward. And then after several weeks, you're like, oh my God, you're just in the groove. Like, you know exactly how to set up, and your quads are just screaming at you because every rep, every set is just miraculous. And that continues for a long time. It can continue for weeks. It can continue for months or longer, sometimes several years in many cases. At some point, and this point usually occurs for everyone at some point, the fatigue of that exercise will start to counterbalance the stimulus a little bit. Squats, you've been doing them for so long, there's now a bit of staleness. It takes you more sets to get the same pumps you used to, more sets to get the same local disruption and soreness and decrease in local strength. So you're not actually using the muscle to power its muscle growth nearly as much as you could be. And then in addition to that, maybe your knees are starting to hurt a little bit because it's the same movement every time. Your back is starting to hurt. It's essentially wear and tear injuries or wear and tear sort of kind of irritations start to add up. And at some point, someone's like, hey, squats are great for your quads. This is your exercise, right? And you're like, well, to be honest, in the last couple of weeks, like, I'm not getting a huge pump like I used to. It doesn't seem like I'm hitting my quads as well. And also, like, squats are just like, my joints don't feel like great. Psychologically, the exercise feels really stale. Like, I just don't want to do it. It's really hard to try hard on it. And then you think, okay, the stimulus has seemingly declined. The fatigue has gone up. So the stimulus to fatigue ratio now is like, man, it's just not as good as it used to be. Now that may still be your best option, but there's other exercises. Let's say you think creatively and you're like, I'm going to try hack squats. You try hack squats instead of squats for the first time in, let's say, 6 months. The stimulus is pretty good and your knees don't hurt, your back doesn't hurt. You're like, wow, okay, this is something. I think the stimulus to fatigue ratio is higher on hack squats now for me than it is for regular squats. I'm going to start doing hack squats. And of course, we get that same curve where for several weeks, the stimulus to fatigue ratio for hack squats actually improves because you get better at doing them. And then they follow the same thing where for a while, maybe weeks, maybe months, they get better or stay the same. And then at some point, they start to dip off. And whatever exercise next has the higher stimulus to fatigue ratio, that's what you trade in. It's almost a similar idea with many sort of issues for replacement. Let's say you have a standard meal of chicken and rice that you like to eat for dinner. Somebody could ask, like an alien comes down from another planet, asks, why are you eating chicken and rice? When do you decide that you're going to switch to fish and pasta? And you say, well, like when I get sick of the chicken and rice, and he may ask you to go into more detail. And so when the chicken and rice doesn't taste as good, that's the stimulus side. And when it gets like annoying to chew all that rice and to wash the dishes because the way I prep the chicken, it just like crusts the dish, and that's the fatigue side. And you're like, at some point I just need something different. And then when you eat pasta for the first time in a while, you're like, wow, this is great. The stimulus is great. It's not fatiguing. The whole thing is novel. And then that's how you trade off almost everything that you do in your life. When you trade one thing out for another, it's kind of a stimulus to fatigue ratio itself. So if someone can say to you, hey, why are you doing this exercise? And you say, well, it's the best stimulator and the least fatiguing thing for me right now. If someone can say, well, what about this other exercise? And you honestly are like, that actually would be better. You should have switched that exercise, or should be. But if you can honestly say, no, like, this is the best thing for me right now, keep doing it because it's the best thing.
Yeah, I suppose with the stimulus fatigue ratio, you could, I suppose, say when it becomes not fit for purpose anymore, when the muscle
exactly less fit for
what
purpose.
You're looking for.
Totally. And it could be still a good exercise, but there could be a better one. Like if you've done bench press for forever and then traveling, you didn't have access to a bench press, but you had an incline bench with dumbbells, and you do incline dumbbell press at a low incline, and it just smashes your pecs, and your shoulders feel way better and your elbows feel way better. You're like, why the hell don't I just do this when I'm back in my home gym? Like, the answer is you probably should be. So if you can have a higher stimulus to fatigue ratio, that's probably when you should switch your exercise. If you argue against that and say, well, I think that we should switch for other reasons, I would be very interested to hear what other reasons could be more compelling than how much stimulus you're getting and how little fatigue you get.
That's probably when people start to say kind of anecdotally say things like, oh, barbell squats are bad for your back or bad for your knees. That's probably that point they've hit in the movement that they just.
Oh yeah, totally. And also I think another one is they never really knew the proper technique anyway.
Yeah, there is that.
Like that's the big one, is like, oh, I used to squat in such a way that hurt my knees and back too, and then I learned how to squat properly and then never had a knee or back injury from squats again. So
yeah, so many things that can go into it. We're gonna kind of switch a little bit to the recovery and fatigue management side of things. And I suppose just ask what the main essentials of recovery are. I know there's obviously the basics of your sleep and your hydration, but in terms of, I know you touched on deloads, but in terms of training in depth, a lot of people tend to think they overtrain. So I suppose where's that threshold where I suppose overtraining comes into it, and how to deal with that?
It's a very easy threshold to detect, it actually turns out. Depending on how technical you want to discuss. So when most people say I'm overtrained, they actually mean I'm overreached. Overtraining is a pretty intense clinical condition, which takes months to get out of, if you get out of it at all. Overreached takes a week or two to recover from that sort of temporary overreaching of your ability to recover. So most people say I'm overtrained, they actually mean I'm overreached. And overreaching is very easy to define as actually overtraining from a pure performance standpoint. It doesn't matter how you feel. It doesn't matter what your perception is. If you can continue to maintain or increase your rep strength, you are not overreached. You're just not. You can be in a very high fatigue state that could be not very sustainable, and you may become overreached shortly thereafter, but you're not overreached until your performance takes a decline. So it's very easy to measure. Someone can say, man, I think I'm overreached. You're like, okay, so talk them, what lift are you overreached on? I say bench press, man, it's totally toast. I got you. What'd you bench 2 weeks ago? 100 kilos for sets of 5. What'd you bench last week? 105 kilos for sets of 5. What'd you bench this week? They're like, 107.5 kilos for sets of 5. You're like, okay. So you're still getting stronger. They're like, yeah, like you're not overreached. Like, but I feel like shit. Like, well, welcome to hard training. Can you imagine being an MMA fighter that trains 30 hours a week? They might feel overreached all the time. But if the performance is still either stable or increasing, they're just, by sports science definition, not overreached, not overtrained. Now, if you have a week where you feel like total shit, you're training a lot, you're pushing your limits, and then all of a sudden, you used to bench 107.5 for sets of 5. Now you come in at 97.5 for sets of 4. It's tough, and you can't even get sets of 5. Yeah, you're probably overreached. And if that happens twice within the same week, it's not just a one-off incident, like a bad session. If it's 2 bad sessions in a row for your chest is probably overreached. It's probably time to get away from super hard training, at least for a session, probably for at least half of a week. And often, if it's pretty gnarly, then an entire week of deloading, which is to say much less training than normal. So your recovery abilities can overwhelm the amount of fatigue that you have.
Yeah. I suppose with the recovery side of things, obviously we will touch on that a little bit. So what can you do then if you hit that overreaching state?
Yeah. You have a couple choices. One is you can take your next session for that muscle group and make it a recovery session. An easy formula for that is doing half the reps with half the load. That's it. So if you're usually doing 100 kilos for sets of 10, 50 kilos for sets of 5. I mean, that's ridiculously easy. What ends up happening is that muscle still gets used to get some blood put through it. And it's essentially almost like a rehab workout. And then you come back the next session, which may be 2 or 3 days later, and you could be significantly healed. That's if it's a small muscle group or you're only a little bit overreached, so on and so forth. If you're overreached in more than one muscle group at the same time, and there's quite a bit of systemic fatigue, or if the muscle that you overreached is really sore, really messed up, and performance is really down, what you can do is take a recovery half week, in which all the sessions that fall into one half of a week are easy, like I described. They're all recovery sessions. And if it's a systemic issue, like you having trouble sleeping, etc., then you can just recovery half week your entire body. So, like, even if your quads are doing just fine, you stop training your quads hard for that half week. It's really like a really big really big reduction in training effort and load. And that actually lets you recovery abilities hypothetically scoot up quite a bit, and maybe by another several weeks of hard training. And if most of your body has reached the point of overreaching a few times, multiple muscle groups, your systemic fatigue is super high, you want to recharge for another productive mesocycle of training, which is to say 1 to 2 months of productive training after, you should probably do a whole deload, which, without making it too complex of a discussion, is the applying of a recovery session to an entire week's worth of training. And you may say, well, gee, after a week of training that easy, I'm just going to be like crazy and ready to go lift. Well, that's perfect, because you'll need that insanity for another 4 to 8 weeks of training, and you'll be very, very well recovered. The point of a deload, some people misconstrue as this will recover me so that I can train hard for the next week, and that's false. The point of a deload is to recover you so much that you recover to train for another 4 to 8 weeks. It's like if you're doing a road trip and you stop instead of for 15 minutes at what do you guys call them, petrol stations over there, or gas stations?
Got in one petrol station.
Petrol, there you go. You go to the petrol station and you take you pee and you buy a few snacks. Yeah, for the next 3 hours or 2 hours of driving, that could be enough of a recharge. But if you know that you need to drive like 16 hours tomorrow, it's not all petrol stops. So you're going to have to stop at a hotel or by the side of the road and actually get a full night's sleep. And someone could say, like, well, like, if you just have some caffeine, you could drive another 3 hours. But yeah, but my goal is to drive another 3 hours, drive another 16, and I need a full recharge for that. So a lot of times people cut their deload short because they're like, I feel fine. Like, the goal is not to feel fine, it's to feel better than fine. It's to be greedy for gains, to feel like you're untrained, to feel like you don't even know what the gym looks like anymore. Then you're ready for another real mesocycle of training.
Yeah, I'm currently on a deload now. I've dropped, but I've not dropped weight. I've dropped sets. I found that the most fatiguing thing about deload was actually stripping the weight. I think I spent more time stripping the weight on and off than actually training.
Sure.
I think the way I described it to one of my clients was during a deload, they were kind of like, oh, shall I do this? Shall I add cardio in? Shall I do this, that, and the other? And I said, don't think about week 4. Think about week 8 and week 10. Yes. This is what you're doing it for. Don't worry about what's happening now. Because there's a reason for it.
100%.
I suppose on the fatigue, I listened to you say something on a podcast. I think it was last week. I can't remember which one it was. Sorry to whoever hosted that for the lack of plug. But the idea of failure and training to failure, and you've made an interesting comment saying that your version of training to failure might be very different to other people's versions of failure. And I watched a couple of videos, and that looks like failure beyond failure.
Well,
what do you mean by failure? Because I know, like, this is not meant to be in a kind of a bitchy way to anyone, but you do see people training to failure, and it almost seems like they've some people's version of failure is just when it starts to hurt, sure, as opposed to 10 reps after it starts to hurt.
A lot of sets start hurting right away. You know, failures, again, as from earlier, it's very easy to define. It is when you cannot do any more proper repetitions, proper defined as the goal range of motion, and also the constancy of good technique. If either one of those falls off, you failed. So when your range of motion and technique are not really in question because you've been training so long and you've had a high commitment to both, it's really about relative effort, and that you're going to meet a lot of pain and resistance. but it's kind of a fun challenge. And I don't look at it as this bad thing. It's kind of a fun game of like, can I get one more repetition? And if you just keep playing that game, eventually you'll fail, especially if you have a spotter and it's a safe lift. There's no problem with failing. The worst thing that can happen is the bar moves to some extent and then it stops moving and then someone takes it off of you. So just keep trying to do another rep. A lot of people get caught up in that sort of excitement of another rep, let their technique slide. You definitely don't want to do that, because then somebody could ask, what is exactly the point of your training? And you can say, well, stimulate the lats, and they say, well, the way you're doing bent rows now actually stimulates the glutes and not the lats. And they're like, right, okay, that's really stupid. So I think a lot of the people that don't train hard enough, they're counterbalanced on the other side. People will train so hard that their technique and range of motion start to suffer, and then it's not really clear why they're training at all. So it's got to be a balance between the two, and really it's setting your technique super straight, setting range of motion, and then committing to them and just going and going and going until you can't go anymore. And sometimes that really hurts, and it's really, really tough, and it's very, very fatiguing, and it's something that has some benefits, but probably not enough to do all the time. And a lot of times the way I like to program is you don't go to failure, you go to 3 reps in reserve in your first week of training. And as the weeks progress, you increase some load or increase reps. And eventually you'll hit failure sooner or later because you won't be able to match the performance you're targeting.
You've literally just answered my next question.
Oops. Well, that's good.
Which was, when should you train to failure? But there you go.
Yeah. And you can train to failure all the time. But again, the stimulus to fatigue ratio of failure training has been pretty well and directly examined in the literature. And it's been shown that training to failure, and especially in advanced folks, may be a little bit more growth promoting, but it causes so much more fatigue that maybe you could do more sets of not failure training, actually just get more growth overall at the same fatigue cost. And the research is good that we have it on there, although as limited as most research is in this area specifically. But folks that have been training for a long time kind of can intuit this if they're thinking about things. I've had some incredibly productive training cycles in which I never went to failure a single time. And I've had some very non-productive cycles in which I did go to failure all the time, and some productive ones. But the one thing that is very clear, I'll put it this way, in my 21 years of training myself and hundreds of other people, it's never clear to me that going to failure has an especially profound, or I would say like ecologically detectable effect on growth. Like, it's not obvious to me that it makes you grow better. Maybe it does by small margins, nothing I can tell in practice with myself or former clients, but I can definitely tell that the fatigue it causes is just a different quality level of fatigue. It's that much higher. If someone does a set of 2 reps in reserve, beats them up. If someone does a set to true failure, it wipes them out. And the amount of volume you can actually do if you're going to true failure may be half of the volume you can do. Holy crap. My computer mouse just moved on its own. That's encouraging. Maybe I'm getting hacked. Maybe.
Or ghosts, maybe?
Ghosts are a reasonable idea. So it may be that half or something like that of the volume that you can do training not to failure can be done with training to failure as far as fatigue is concerned. So, which is to say, 3 sets in the squat to all out failure may fatigue you as much, both acutely and long term in a cumulative way, as 6 sets of squats, 2 or 3 reps in reserve. I wouldn't be so uncomfortable making that claim. I mean, imagine just psychologically, someone had to tell you, all right, you can either do 3 sets of squats to fucking grinding failure, or you can do 6 sets of squats, 2 or 3 reps in reserve each one. It's not clear to me which one is easier or harder, right? However, multiple studies now confirmed the 6 sets, 2 or 3 reps in reserve almost certainly grows more muscle than 3 sets to all-out failure. So, can we, at the very end of a mesocycle, go to true failure? I think there's some advantages to that. Specifically, you never really know what RIR you're pretending you're doing until you drive something to failure. You could be saying, oh, I've been doing sets of 15, and I think my true RIR is a set of, with this weight, a set of, 17. I was 2 reps in reserve at 15. You try to go all failure and you get 21 reps. Jesus, you were 6 reps in reserve the whole time. Like, you could have been training way more efficiently because that's too easy. Right. So every now and again, failure is good, and it may offer some overreaching benefits that before a deload week, really going much further than your body's capable of can give you some rebound, super compensatory recovery and growth. That may be a thing, but it's not one of these situations where failure training is just something you want to be doing all the time, because again, for the fatigue it seems to cause, it's just not paying dividends for muscle growth that you would be comfortable paying. It's almost like going to a restaurant that is well rated or something, and typically your restaurant experience with a partner could be like 50 pounds. Or you guys use pounds over there? You guys use the
Kilos, but either way.
No, I mean for currency.
Oh yeah, sorry.
Yeah. I was switching the subject. It's my fault. So maybe it's 40 pounds for two people to go to a restaurant, have a good meal, and then someone's like, you really got to go to this one place. We'll call it failure restaurant, and there you pay 80 pounds, not 40, for two people, and you're kind of like, damn it, I'm shelling out this money. This food better be fucking good. And it turns out the food is better than it was at the 40-pound restaurant, but like only by like a little bit. You're like, yeah, okay, like these noodles are definitely like crispier. That's nice, but it's not 80 pounds nice. It's not twice as nice. So if someone's like, hey, did you like that failure restaurant? Do you want to go there all the time? You're going to kind of be like, oh no, it was great. But then privately, you're going to fuck that place. There's no reason to go there unless friends are visiting and I have to impress somebody or something like that. It's just not worth the trade-off in most cases.
Yeah. I do often wonder when I listen to your content and watch your content, whether you've got like analogy cards written somewhere like on your hand.
All I do is study for podcasts in my spare time. Okay, each podcast is like a test.
When I'm not on a podcast, I'm preparing for them.
That's right. The secret to my analogies is quite simple. I don't think I'm smart enough to think of complex concepts all at the same time. So whenever I learn a concept like reps in reserve or failure training, volume equivalency, I like to just understand it at a very simple level. And then once you understand something very simply, analogies are easy because you're like, oh, wait, a ton of shit works like this. So yeah, it's really just a symptom of my stupidity.
That's a very humble way of looking at it.
It's a humble brag for sure. I know I'm smart. I'm just fucking around.
I suppose again with the training to failure, it's a short-term look at training. It's a crazy pump through doing 5 drop sets on the leg extension and I can't move now. Sure. But then next week, like I said, you're thinking about week 2 rather than week 12.
Yes. So we have the hypertrophy book out through Renaissance Periodization, the Scientific Principles of Hypertrophy Training, which is wrote. And there's a bunch of stuff in the book, but one of the cool little snippets I personally really like from the book is you determine your progression, or in other words, how hard you're training today and how hard you're training next week, not just from how much stimulus do you need to provide in this session, but how much do you need to provide in the next session, and is it sustainable? So it's like, if you have to, here's another analogy. If you're in a military mechanic and there's fighter planes landing on your runway and you have to fix them up and they take off and go fight the war and then another one lands, yeah, you can go as fast as you can fixing each plane and throwing away the various instruments that you're using, the wrenches and screwdrivers, just throwing them wherever, because it is faster to just throw them wherever if you're fixing one plane. But when the next fucking plane lands, you're going to be like, where the fuck is my shit? And it's going to take way longer. So if someone sees you fixing a plane meticulously and then putting the tools back and where they belong, they could be like, mate, what are you doing? This plane's going back to war, like, hurry the fuck up. And you could be like, no, I know, but another plane comes in and I have to make sure I'm prepared as well for that plane. So anytime you train really hard, if you have another week of hard training, you have to train hard enough to make gains, yes, but also not so hard that there's no progression, there's too much fatigue, and there's no progression available for the next week. That's the critical part. And then there's only one time in which it doesn't apply, the week before a deload. Then it's like the last plane lands, needs to be fixed up, and then he goes and wins the war, and everyone goes home. You throw your fucking instruments wherever the fuck you want. Peace. Just leave the base after that. I don't even need these anymore, right? That's totally fine. but not every week is the week before your deload. And a lot of people seem to, and then you get stupid Instagram memes like train with every session like it's your last. Like, what the fuck is wrong with you? Like, it's not your last, idiot.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't really plan on getting run over by a bus tomorrow. I'd like to train
for sure
as well.
Oh man, I was in the gym today, and there was I think a song lyric, because we all have to listen to the gym's music if we don't have headphones, and my headphones always slip off when I'm training, so I just stand there and listen to the dumbest shit in the world, pop music. And one of the lines was like, dance as if this was like your last day on earth. And I was like, I actually wouldn't dance at all if this was my last day on earth. I would just like talk to my closest friends and tell them real personal secret shit that I've thought about them for forever. Yeah, you're fucking kidding me? Fuck that. There's an asteroid coming. You're like, dance, let's do
it. Yeah. Well, where's the why isn't the ball dropping? Where's my disco ball when I need it?
That's right.
I might actually moving home soon. I might actually have to get an emergency disco ball just in case. My doomsday disco ball.
Yeah, like, oh, we're done. Coronavirus 3.0 is out. Just dancing time at this point.
I think those are the main questions I wanted to cover. Yes, it is. But now we move on to the quickfire round.
Oh boy, I'm really bad at these. I overthink everything. That's my main job.
That's fine. I may ask you why on certain ones.
Sure.
I think I need like a big, like, dramatic announcement for the quickfires. Wonder if I could hire someone to do that.
You need to work on it, yeah, or you can try it yourself.
I think I can have a voice for it myself, but
yeah,
outsourcing. Okay.
I don't know if you remember, there was a game back in the 1990s, and this does reveal my age. It was a children's game called Crossfire. It was like a stupid air hockey game, like a table hockey game.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, they made it so fucking cool. So first of all the kids had like sunglasses on. I had never met a child who was 9 years old and had sunglasses. And the kids were just so cool. And they had this like anthem, like Crossfire. And I was like, oh my God, how can I be this cool? And it turns out I never had that in me to be that cool. I never got the Crossfire game, which is why I had no friends. I resorted to lifting weights. Now look at me. I'm a ridiculous mess of an individual because of childhood trauma of not having the cool board game when I was younger.
See, this might come to me later in life by not having a cool quickfire round intro.
Exactly. And you're going to be like, I wish I hired that guy.
Yeah. I'm going to be straight on this as soon as this finishes. Okay. So hypertrophy or strength training? These are preferences rather than...
I see. Than pointless juxtapositions, which have no value system on which to judge them. Hypertrophy training.
Carnivore or keto?
Keto.
Why?
Carnivore is the needlessly restricted version of keto, which is already needlessly restricted. It's like, do you want to stay in a jail with just bars, or do you want like a TV and a couch, but you're still in jail? I'm like, yes, TV and a couch, please.
Yeah, it's almost like someone looked at keto and was like, how can I exploit this but slightly different?
Too easy. Next challenge. Keto is way too easy. I need something to really fuck me up. Yeah.
Cereal or oats?
You mean like breakfast cereal, like children's breakfast cereal?
Yeah.
I feel bad for answering cereal, but it's fun. Oats are not fun.
Pre-workout shake or post-workout shake?
Post-workout for sure. A lot of times I don't even consume food pre-workout, especially on leg workouts, because I will throw it up. So
that's training to failure.
Throw up. That's right. Well, I don't know. Some people could say like just throw up and keep going, but easier said than done.
Yeah. Hack squat or leg press?
Honestly, like when you sent me a couple of these to like check out by email to make sure the episode went okay, I looked at this one specifically and I was like, fuck, I don't even know what I'm going to say. There's like the two loves of my life, and like, how can I trade one versus the other? I'll say hack squat. And my reasoning is it is a bit more of a general exercise. It still hits your back and glutes more than leg press, which is a little bit more isolatory. So I just hack squat. But folks, for those listening, I love leg presses, and this is a fucking challenge round. It's quick fire, and I have to pick. That's why I chose hack squat.
And I love how, like, when you said that I sent that's the kind of plan for the episode over. That's just generally so it looks like I know what I'm doing.
There you go. And
Did
they
I pass?
convinced me.
There you
Oh
go.
yeah. I mean, here I am falling for your
True.
bullshit on your podcast.
Phil or Ronnie?
Ronnie. 200. So I was there live, so to speak. Not really. I logged into the internet in 2003 after a highly anticipated comeback for Ronnie for getting beat at the GNC show of strength at 242 pounds, and in 2002 got beat by Gunter Schlierkamp, who was much bigger, and he won a very controversial 2002 Olympia to Kevin Levrone, who he should have lost to, many experts say, and the year before, in 2001, Jay Cutler should have beat him, people say. So Ronnie was kind of in this place where people were like, Ronnie is done, and he did a lot of interesting things, a lot of dedication and a lot of pharmacology, and then in 2003, from 2002 being on stage at the Olympia, reported 242 pounds. He was on stage in 2003, 287 pounds. And I remember, because it was a big controversy, a big like sort of run up saying, who's going to win this Olympia? Is it going to be Jay Cutler, Gunter Schlierkamp, or is it going to be Ronnie Coleman? And all I did was I looked at one picture of Ronnie. It was the front relaxed pose, and I just started laughing. And I didn't stop laughing for 5 minutes because it was an absurd comic book-like thing. That Olympia victory may be the biggest margin Olympia victory anyone's ever seen. As soon as Ronnie walked out, I mean, they've done interviews with judges when they were like, okay, this is over. Like, I don't even need to see what Jay Cutler looks like. And sure enough, Jay looked great. Yeah. But it was lights out. And that to me is like that 287-pound 2003 Ronnie. That is a physique that maybe it took, what's his name? Big Ramy. This year he won the Olympia at 290 pounds, same height. Maybe Big Ramy's physique is the only one that could really fuck with that Ronnie physique. That's 2003 to 2020, 17 fucking years for that to be a comparison. That's a legend.
I actually listened to a podcast earlier with it. They were comparing, they were kind of saying what Jay Cutler could have done, how many he could have won if Ronnie never existed. And then they kind of said that possibly the other competitors would have stepped up their game without Ronnie being there, almost as if like those last couple of reps they did over time, they were just like, well, what's the point? Because they're not gonna
demoralizing. That much Ronnie. Better is to be demoralizing. Yeah. And I don't think Phil Heath ever had that effect. Phil Heath never demoralized anyone. His competition with Kai Green was close enough that where Kai was still trying really hard, and other folks were like, Phil was never unbeatable, though he was an unbelievable champion and still is. Ronnie got to a level in 2003 at which everyone rolled their eyes and like until he gets really old, he's just going to keep winning, and that is exactly what happened.
Or is back on knees go.
And that's also what happened.
Yeah. Favorite back exercise?
The barbell bent over row with a deficit.
Why the deficit?
Because the deeper stretch just hits your fucking soul. There's not a thing that exercise doesn't do. That exercise is what replaces, my total lack of a moral compass. I do enough barbell bent rows and I just feel like a good human being.
I was going to say something about religion, but I won't.
No, by all means, if you're comfortable.
I've met people upon my time who kind of justify being an asshole by, I go to church, so it's fine.
There you go. That's why I'm an asshole. It's because I do barbell bent over rows in the deficit.
I agree with you more than the former. Bodybuilding or jiu-jitsu?
Bodybuilding right now, because I've literally made that choice to take my jiu-jitsu and reduce the volume and intensity and frequency of it, because I'm trying to push my bodybuilding as high as it'll go. But after probably, depending on how my health looks, a few years after turning 40, I'm currently 36. I'm going to be switching radically to a high preference of jiu-jitsu, try to get as good at that as possible while putting bodybuilding away forever and actually just training for jiu-jitsu, and all of my weight training will be going towards jiu-jitsu betterment at that point. So at some point, jiu-jitsu will be first priority. I am very passionate, but it's just so fun. But bodybuilding is deep inside me. I'm trying to say that with as little eroticism as possible. It's tough to say things like that and take yourself seriously.
Is that a world exclusive? Does anyone know that you're planning to step away from bodybuilding?
It might be. I think I might have mentioned.
I'm going to play it.
Nobody really gives a shit, you know. As long as I stay in bodybuilding and I'm like an expert and I make podcasting useful, and when I become not useful anymore by focusing on jiu-jitsu, people just forget who I am. That'll be totally fine. I've already forgotten who I was. So I'm all lost.
Right. Awesome. That's all we have time for. I don't want to take up too much of your time. Is there a sign off you'd like to tell the listeners where they can find you?
Renaissance Periodization YouTube. So just Google my name or Renaissance Periodization and just put it in the YouTube. And we have a YouTube channel that's growing really fast. We just basically, like almost every day, there's a new informational, pretty long form video on there. We have tons of series all about how to get more jacked, stronger, recover from injuries, have better nutrition, get leaner. We're just putting every conceivable bit of information slowly but surely for free on YouTube. So go on YouTube, click on a bunch of ads, comment for the algorithm so that I can have more money. Because at the end of the day, I don't give a shit about fitness. I just want to get rich. And look, please help. It's a worthwhile goal, right? Make Dr. Mike rich again, ever for the first time.
Yeah, I love that.
That's it.
Because why else would we all do that? Other than
just green. If I could just permanently see like $100 bill in front of my face and nothing else, that's as good as I ever want it to be. But on a serious note,
I'm probably going to fill this with like 10 ads. So if they're
perfect, an ad every minute.
Cool. So per sentence, maybe.
That's probably a good idea.
I could probably retire off this podcast episode alone.
Easy. That's it. There's enough people click on the ads, you get rich.
And of course, with the RP, you've got like tons of very helpful books if you're that much into your fitness, which I assume you would be.
Totally. Yeah, like, if you get on YouTube, nerdy people like you that still read is what you're trying to say. I long ago forgot how to read. I only know how to write. If you get on YouTube, then all that stuff is linked all the way through there. So, and if you get on my Instagram, RP DRMIKE, there's like a link in the bio to all kinds of stuff that I've done and productive things. And then the RP Strength, at RP Strength, is the Renaissance Periodization, a company that I co-founded and work for. And that Instagram is way bigger than mine, and has all kinds of cool stuff on it. So check that out. Or if not, fine. I don't need you then. Don't check it out. Then we can't be friends.
Awesome. Really appreciate you coming on again. Been very helpful. Hopefully, some of the listeners going to take away quite a lot from this. As per usual, if you like the episode, please share it. Tell whoever you can. Shout at some randomer in the street, but from a social distance perspective, 2 meters.
Hey, you. Hey. They're like, yes. Like, listen to this podcast. I'm like, what? You're like, take your headphones. Listen, here's the podcast. Look, you try to show them a little YouTube link. Yeah, that's how you get the police called on you.
You don't need that. Take your mask off. Okay, so I shall catch you all in the next episode. Thank you.